Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's all good. I'm Craig Markovitz. I'm an EIR here in the Swartz Center. I also teach innovation and entrepreneurship courses at Tepper. I'm happy to talk to you today about how to manage your legal counsel as an entrepreneur. You don't know who this is, Dave? You want to?
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dave. I'm the executive director of the Swartz Center for Entrepreneurship, and I am his valet on the side.
So the intent of today's discussion is to be very informal. Okay, we have some slides just for some themes and to get the ideas flowing and be a little provocative, so we have some issues to talk about. But as with everything we do in the Swartz Center, we are here for you. Okay, so over the years, I have worked with all sorts of law firms and attorneys, all walks of life, as has Dave. I shudder to think how many millions of dollars of legal expenses funneled through my companies over 20 plus years. And it's an important relationship for us as entrepreneurs to understand why we need legal counsel, why we need that advice, how to manage it appropriately to get maximum value and benefit, right? And to be a good citizen, right? To manage that relationship so everybody wins, right? Because it is not intended, nor does anyone win if it's adversarial, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about how to manage service providers, how to think about your legal counsel. But again, we'll intersperse the points with some of our own stories. Again, as with everything that Dave and I do, right? It's all experiential. It's all based on real life issues and situations that we were confronted with, that we had to deal with. I mean, our goal for today is for you to take away just a couple of themes, right? A couple of ideas, right? So you understand what you need to consider as you're launching your businesses, as you're starting to ramp up operations, and as things become more and more complex, and you need expert advisors around you to help. So anything to add?
Yeah, so let's make this interactive. If a question comes to mind, probably somebody else in the audience has that same question. We'll definitely leave room for Q&A at the end, but don't wait, right? Just make this interactive. It's meant to be as much a conversation as a presentation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're monitoring the chat if someone has any questions for us. Okay, cool. All right, so let's jump in, right? So the first question, right? When do you need that shark, right? I was very intentional about my illustrations, but no, listen. So it's really never too early to at least start to think about getting expert advice, right? So as you are contemplating starting a business, right? You're getting together with your co-founders, you're thinking about what your plan for world domination is, right? It's really important to have someone that's been there, done that, right? To help you think about the important considerations, because even though you're all very smart and motivated and highly successful to this point and going to be even more successful as you move forward, I have news for you. You're not special, right? Literally thousands, millions of people have been in your shoes in terms of thinking about, well, how do I form a company? What form, right? What state, what structure? Like, how do I think about compensating myself and my founders, right? What do all these considerations look like? Okay, and it's all out there, right? There are tried and true practices. There are people that have been there and done that and understand, right, areas of focus and how you should think about these issues, right? So it is important, critically important, that before you do anything, right, if you're going to form a business, if you want to launch an initiative, if you want to get things going, right, that you at least start to have conversations with people, right, to understand some of these important issues, even if you're not quite ready to start the business yet.
We have formed formal relationships with some law firms, Denton's, Steptoe and Johnston, Pillsbury, so that you have access to them. You don't have to work with those. We also have a bunch of attorneys that have signed up to be mentors and legal experts on our website, and they've offered to give you a half hour of time for pro bono, free, so that there's access to these folks. But like anything else, you have to learn to manage it. There's a reason there are lawyer jokes, right? And so we may delve into a few lawyer jokes during this, but it's not meant to create an adversarial kind of a situation. I actually have a son who's a lawyer. The reason he's a lawyer is because I told him not to be. Sounds funny, but it's probably true. So we get it. We understand. And we want to help you navigate this, because if you don't navigate it well, it can be really expensive and really painful. So that's sort of our goal for today. So even on this first slide, the first bullet point is formation considerations. I don't know how many times people come up and said, I formed an LLC on LegalZoom.com or some equivalent, and now I know I have to be a C Corp in Delaware. What the frick do I do, right? Well, you could have avoided that if you would have, like Craig says, sought that counsel as early as possible. So that's one small example of a challenge that people face right away.
Yeah, absolutely. So couple takeaways from this slide, right? You're not special. Don't do anything that represents uniqueness, right? When you think about these issues, right? Use your relationship, use the access that you have here at the Swartz Center and through your colleagues, right? To understand what they've gone through, who they've worked with, what's gone well, what hasn't. Leverage folks like Dave and myself who have been doing this for a long time, right? Having a quick conversation just for items to consider will save you a lot of aggravation down the road.
Yeah.
Trust
So,
me.
so we actually have other connects workshops to address some of these issues. So the third bullet point is equity compensation. One of our most popular connects is splitting the founder's pie, right? Done by Frank Demler, and gives you just a practical way to think about it and approach it. And as much as you are in love with your co-founder right now, many co-founder relationships end up in divorces, right? And so, you know, you need to think about that. So you have to have an agreement. Like if we go down the road, sort of run into challenges, what do we do? And one of the agreements is for founders is called a buy-sell agreement. It's an agreement put in place at the beginning is if you come, you know, I have to work with this asshole all the time. And so I really don't like working with him. So I messed up and I didn't have a buy-sell agreement with Craig. And so we're stuck with each other, right? I'm kidding, of course, but it's really important because, you know, that does happen down the road. So we'll talk about a lot of these issues as we go through the slides.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so how does a lawyer help, right? And you all can read the slide. We don't have to read the slide, right? But there are so many different nuances and areas of focus and specialties within sort of the boundaries of the legal considerations that we all need to think about as entrepreneurs, that there's no way that any of us can be expert or fluent in each of these, right? And we just put a couple of examples down there, right? General counsel is just your general formation, advice, helping make sure that your board meetings run appropriately, you have your minutes, right? You have all your appropriate documentation, whether it's internal or external, right? You're not setting yourselves up for failure or potential exposure, right? From just an infrastructure and a documentation perspective, right? Then you have things like intellectual property, immigration, all the others, right? And each of those areas of specialty require expertise. And it's not your job as the entrepreneur to become expert in each of those areas. It's your job to understand why those areas are important and how they can affect your business, okay? And make sure that as you communicate with your advisors, experts that are helping you, that you always keep that in mind. Right? It's all about how do these different functional areas, right, and the needs that you have as an entrepreneur trying to grow a business, right? What are the implications of each of these, right? Like, what are the implications if you don't have an appropriate infrastructure to manage new ideas and inventions, right? What if you have ideas that aren't patentable, but do represent trade secrets? Right? And there are standards one has to follow to maintain the integrity of a trade secret, right? And the most common, couple of the most common examples of trade secrets are like the Coca-Cola formula, the Kentucky Fried Chicken recipe, right? Those are proprietary formulas that these companies have maintained internally, right? That represent intellectual property that help create value for their business, right? But they had to understand how do you manage that appropriately so you can maintain the value there, right? And then same with immigration, right? Different visas, different requirements, right? Different processes that one needs to follow to make sure that all of your employees are appropriately documented and accounted for, right? So each of these areas, not all of them perhaps will be applicable to you, right? But some of them certainly will. And so when you think about, it's not the same lawyer that does each of those things, right? It's just like it's difficult sometimes to think about having a software engineer help you design a hardware component, right? There are different areas of expertise, right? And so again, having relationships with folks that understand our lives collectively as entrepreneurs, right? And the unique challenges that we face right? And then have experience working in your field, working with companies in similar stages of development. It's critically important to make sure that you're getting appropriate advice to make sure that you don't do anything that's going to compromise the business down the road. Because again, not special. If someone comes in and they're contemplating making an investment in your business, and they do due diligence, right? And you put all your documents and everything you have in your data room, and they start to look through your employee contracts, your invention disclosure process, provisional patent applications, all the immigration status for your employees, right? You need to have that stuff buttoned up. And if you don't, it's gonna put you behind.
So do you look at this list that Craig put together? There's other items on that list as well, but when you're getting started, for simplicity, probably you want to deal with one law firm that can help you do most, if not all of those things. And we do have relationships, as I said, with the Dentons, the Steptoes, the Pillsburys of the world that can be that representative for you. And they'll have different people within the firm that have expertises in these different areas. But I'm going to fast forward a little bit. What I learned, I've started 5 companies myself with others, with co-founders, and been investors and on the board of many, many others, dozens and dozens of companies, is that the better strategy going forward, once you're established in managing this, is have multiple law firms that you work with that are best of breed to help keep each other honest, right? And we're going to get into some examples a little bit later, how things can careen out of control if you don't manage them. So at the beginning, where you are now, it's best probably to start with one law firm that can help you with most, if not all of these. But as you start to grow and mature, go to best of breed. One law firm might be the very best in intellectual property. One law firm may be the very best in immigration. Those are 2 real specialty types of capabilities that you're going to need. And you don't necessarily need to get that from the law firm that's your general counsel. So we'll get into that in Q&A a little bit later, but I wanted to give you a little sort of a glimpse, down the road. That is, you don't have to marry a lawyer. It's not like your co-founder, right?
Sure. You have a question?
In terms of just thinking about how I can pose my question. So if we're starting off, obviously we don't have very much to work with right now in terms of seeking that first meeting with general counsel, getting your foot right. Like, do you pay them right off the bat for that session? How does that work in terms of that initial first contact?
Let me repeat it for the people that are online. So when you first approach a lawyer, right, to get started, do you pay them for that first meeting or not? Craig, you want to take a shot?
So when you're starting out, particularly those of you that are here, because you have access to our network, you have an opportunity to talk to a number of different people. Right? You can pull out the different lawyers from different firms and figure out who you think has the appropriate skill set and who has the right personality, who you connect with, right? So you want to definitely spend some time interviewing and talking to folks, right? It's not a relationship that you want to jump into without putting a lot of thought behind it, okay? And pretty much any attorney that I would recommend or that Dave would recommend that gets it, right, in terms of what we're trying to do, would have this initial conversation with you at no cost, right? And many of them, the good ones, right, the ones, again, that understand how we operate and that understand what life is like as an entrepreneur, what you're trying to build, right? They're not interested in trying to squeeze a couple bucks out of you up front, right? Because they're not going to make a lot of money there. They want you to be successful so you grow, right? And so then you develop a mutually beneficial relationship, right? So you do a big financing, right, that they'll help you with and where they can generate fees and sort of make it worth their while, right? So any attorney that you talk to early on that wants you to pay right away or that's like not interested in at least talking to you, providing you with their perspective, and trying to understand your need before they start to tell you what they think is probably not, at least in my experience, not a great fit. So long-winded answer to your question, you can't take advantage because all lawyers have their only commodity to sell is time, right? So there is a point where you have to make a decision, right? But early on, as you're sort of trying to get to know people and they're courting you and you're courting them and you're trying to assess whether they're a good fit for you, both skill-wise and personality-wise, those conversations shouldn't cost you anything. And anyone, again, that immediately says, hey, I'm happy to talk to you, but you have to, pay me a retainer or I'm going to charge you per hour, right? Before you even get to know each other a little bit, you're comfortable with each other. It's probably not going to be a great fit.
I just want to make 2 points and then Dan will take your question. So when an entrepreneur approaches Craig or I or any of our entrepreneurs in residence, I think we all have a similar point of view, is that we'll introduce you to as many as 3 different firms to talk to, because that has to be a good cultural fit. There has to be a connection of some sort between you and the lawyer. So you're hiring the firm, but you're really hiring the lawyer, the main lawyer that you're going to work with. And so after meeting one lawyer and making that decision is like having one date and then getting married, right? It just doesn't, it's a relationship that's a long time, and you need to invest in that and spend some time meeting different lawyers and getting a feel for it. The second point is that most of the law firms that we work with have startup packages of some sort to reduce the amount of upfront cost of getting into that relationship with them. Again, it's to the point that Craig makes. Their win is that you grow and that you continue to buy legal services for them. So their win is not at the beginning. Their win is down the road.
It's a long-term relationship,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I was gonna say one other thing about that, but it slipped my mind, so go ahead.
Don't want to get like ahead of, we were talking about this, but as far as our IP agreements, when you're starting out, is your agreement gonna look like any other like companies, or what are the dimensions along which those?
So you're talking about sort of, like about patent application, you're talking about invention assignment and making sure that intellectual property stays within the business.
The second.
Right, so that there's standard agreements for that, like employment agreements that have those clauses, and there's also separate agreements that manage that. So that, my reaction would be that there are, any attorney that understands our world and that works with, if you said to them, hey, I want to make sure that I have all the appropriate documentation to make sure that I have employment agreements, I have invention assignment, I have all the non-solicitation, I have everything that I need to make sure that all the intellectual property that is created by our folks remains property of the business, they should be able to pull that right off the shelf and hand it to you and make some changes, right? Customize it based on your specific situation. But the general theme of what you're trying to do, right, which is maintain ownership and have clear chain of control around inventions and assets for the business, should be right out of the gate, right?
Yep, absolutely.
You shouldn't, a lot of this stuff, again, as we're starting they shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, right? You shouldn't have to spend a lot of time or money getting some of these standard agreements, even when you start to get into some of your seed funding, right? Like a safe, right? Using Y Combinator, using the National Venture Capital Association documents for a lot of things that we do. Those are generally accepted by pretty much everyone, right? And your counsel should be comfortable using standard agreements that they've used before, right? We'll talk a little bit about how to evaluate whether they're a good fit. And just customize it to your specific needs, and off you go.
So there is an interesting trend that started maybe 7-8 years ago, and I haven't looked back to see if it has continued, but a lot of the startup law firms, especially the law firms that are in Silicon Valley, but it's true of law firms that are here in Pittsburgh, decided that, a lot of the early agreements are commodities. They're standard, right? So they would put them on their websites available for download. So you don't even have to engage that law firm to actually get a standardized agreement. So if you wanted a sales contract, or you wanted an invention assignment, or you wanted a convertible note or a safe, as Craig just mentioned, those are available from credible people that you can get and not have to pay. So one of the strategies that I adopted, I don't know if you did this, Craig, is when I was still running companies, is I would go find standard agreements, or I would keep agreements I had in my previous companies. I would go grab them, I would modify them, then I would send them to my lawyer of record and say, here's the document, I've used it in the past. Is there anything that I need to think of, right? So that they don't have to create that document from the get-go and spend 10 hours on a document. They might spend 30 minutes on a document, and that's a big difference in cost, which we'll get to a little bit later.
Yeah, I agree, right? So a lot of that stuff is out there, but the last part of the statement is what's important, is making sure that you have professional eyeballs look at it, right? So we're going to talk a little about that nuance, right? You don't want to be sort of free spending, right? It's cost, but you also, so you don't be frivolous with just sort of throwing money out on lawyers, but you also don't want to be afraid or reluctant to call on them for advice, right? It goes back to that relationship you're building. It defeats the purpose, right? You want to have the right kind of relationship with your attorney, that they're a trusted advisor, and that if you have a sales agreement that you're comfortable with, that you send to them, you're sure they're not going to go very heavy on the pencil, right? That they're going to look at it and understand your needs and practically give you the advice to make sure you're appropriately protected and that the document does what you want it to do. right? Keeping in mind that, you're a startup and that you're trying to manage your costs and that you're trying to grow this thing, right? So I am not an advocate. One of the things Dave said earlier was just go into LegalZoom and form your company. And I am not an advocate for doing that stuff on your own. I think it's penny wise and pound foolish, right? But I'm also not an advocate for, spending gobs and gobs of your precious early dollars to have custom documents drawn up for situations that don't warrant it, right? And I think there's a balance in the middle where you can use tried and true standard practices, documents that are accepted around the world, right? Make sure that they're correct and make sure that they're appropriate for your business and your goals and your needs, and then off you go.
Here's a,
I have an online.
okay, we'll cut that one. So here's a technique that you can use as an entrepreneur and you're interviewing lawyers and you're talking about the various needs that you will have, the different types of documents. Ask them what their process for in creating intellectual property. If they tell you they're going to start from scratch and build it up, that's a red flag, right? If they don't say that they're going to use a standard document, you should say, well, wouldn't you just start with standard documents to help keep the costs down? These are questions you can ask lawyers when you're interviewing them and deciding to get with them. It's really, really important that you're not afraid to ask those tough questions, because if you don't, we're going to show you some examples later where things spun out of control and cost entrepreneurs hundreds of thousands of dollars when they didn't have hundreds of thousands of dollars.
True. What's the question?
Is there a link to the standard agreements from these law firms' website? I'm currently looking for an NDA agreement for sharing ideas with folks in outsourcing work to a firm.
So the question was, is there a link or are there resources to some of these standard documents that Dave and I are referring to? And the answer to that is yes. And the place I would start would be the National Venture Capital Association. I think it's nvca.org.
Yes.
It is a trade association for the venture industry, and lots of folks use it. And then I think that, without naming names, right, there are plenty of firms and folks out there that have put stuff out there. So if you just Google it.
Yeah. So one place you can go is Y Combinator. We talked about the SAFE, simple agreement for future equity. Even the Swartz Center, instead of trying to create our own version of the SAFE, we went and we grabbed their SAFE. We took it to legal counsel and said, we don't want to change anything. You just add what you need to add to protect Carnegie Mellon, right? So that's an example. The Y Combinator, as you know, is an accelerator for a lot of startups. They have a lot of documents beyond just the investment documents that are there too. We wanted to stay agnostic to law firms here today. So we're not going to tell you exactly which law firms to go look at, but a little bit of searching on, the internet, you'll find it immediately.
But NVCA and Y Combinator are two Switzerland neutral, highly regarded, very credible resources for all the things that we're talking about here. Okay. And again, the emphasis is not to do it yourself. The emphasis is to take what's generally accepted, right? What people are comfortable with, make sure that expert eyes are looking at it. So you and your business are protected. And so it gives you what you need out of those documents. Okay. All right. So how do you find your lawyer? I mean, I guess you just see who's advertising on TV, right? The most and just call that number. But actually, no, right? So just in any industry, expertise, quality, integrity, all these things, it's variable, right? There's 1 million plus lawyers in this country. And so how do you decide, right? Well, it's some of the things that we talked about. Right. The most important thing you can do is actually that last bullet, is to utilize your network. Right. You can certainly talk to us. You can certainly look at the resources on the Swartz Center website. You should talk to your colleagues, right? People that are starting businesses or have perhaps a little ahead of you in the process to see who they're using, to see what they like and what they don't like. Right. Because examples that I've seen, right, is someone has come to me saying, hey, we're trying to raise some friends and family round. We're getting this company off the ground. We have an instrument that we're going out and we're trying to raise $500,000. And you look at the document and you sort of understand what they're trying to do, and it is just completely out of bounds. It's because they have a cousin who's a real estate lawyer in Central PA, and they agreed to help them put their investment documents together, and it's just a total cluster, right? I'm sure that cousin of theirs is very capable and a wonderful person and really good at real estate law, right? But didn't know anything about putting investment documents together, right? And it just ends up creating a lot of aggravation and a lot of heartache. And honestly, probably some very difficult conversations around Thanksgiving dinner table, right? So you want to make sure that you're thinking about like who has experience in our industry, right? How do we get comfortable with the work that they're doing and that they understand our specific needs, right? What have your colleagues and your network seen from an experience perspective? Who's credible, right? Who can get the job done? Who understands, again, the unique needs that we have as entrepreneurs, right? And what we're trying to do. And then, as we said earlier, you just cannot substitute just talking to people, because you will find who you connect with and who you don't connect with, right?
The Swartz Center EIRs are a great place to start. They're not the end all and be all resource, but they're a great place to start because we have relationships and we can talk you through some of the things Craig just said. One common misnomer is that people think Carnegie Mellon lawyers can provide you with advice, and we can't. Carnegie Mellon is its own entity and is protecting its own issues. Where we get confusion is intellectual property, because we do have startups at Carnegie Mellon that are funded by federal research or by corporate sponsors that the university has the obligation to try to commercialize. So we have a group called the Center for Tech Transfer and Enterprise Creation, CTEC. You probably all heard of it. Reed McManigal, you might have run into him. They're responsible for that technology coming out of the labs. It's federally funded, and they have to make best efforts to protect that intellectual property and then commercialize it. Most of you that are in here are students, either undergrad or master students. You own your own intellectual property, and the university will not help you in any way. You need to find your own counsel to do that. If any of you in here are PhD students that have been funded by a lab and you want to commercialize your technology from your lab, then CTEC is a resource here for you for that intellectual property protection. And they will help you with enterprise formation, and they have relationships with lawyers that have specific vertical industries. So most of you are probably not eligible. Some of you are eligible to use that. So if you have any question on that, we can talk about that
It's a
later.
nice resource. And I'll tell you, so one of my stories, so I started a company that was based on technology that required a license, right? The university owned. And we worked with the tech transfer office, and they actually already had legal counsel assigned to the docket. So this technology had a patent filed, had some other work around it. And so the university had hired a very capable law firm out of Boston to manage the invention disclosure, to manage the docket. When we licensed it, we originally used that counsel, and they were very capable. They were great. They were extraordinarily expensive. And so once I got my legs under me and sort of understood what we were trying to do and went through this exact process, found a law firm here in Pittsburgh that was more than capable to help us move the company forward, was about half the price, right? And we were able to build that relationship. So I transitioned the management of the asset base of the business from one law firm to another based on proximity and cost, right? So you all have flexibility to do that if you're in a licensable technology situation, right? But at the end of the day, one of the things that Dave talks about when he taught lean entrepreneurship was building teams, right? And the concept that resonated with me, I've heard him talk about many times, is this idea of hiring slow and firing fast, right? And the hiring slow piece, I think, is very appropriate for this slot. Okay, you may feel like that you're, at the starting gate and that you're impatient, that you got to go, right? And those are characteristics of entrepreneurs, right? Like being very impatient and just like ready to go, right? Ready, fire, aim sort of mentality. But in this instance, it's really important that you take some time and you're intentional about the process. Right? Think about your needs, talk to folks that have been there, done that, spend your time speaking with different firms and different attorneys until you find someone that checks all the boxes from a capability perspective, someone that you're going to want to work with. You spend a lot of time with this person. My general counsel, who we ultimately retained, became a trusted advisor and a friend. And I would do things like, we were off to a strategic meeting with a big potential customer in the middle of Indiana, and I threw him in the car. I'm like, you're coming with me, right? I wanted him there because I trusted his advice and his perspective, and he was a steady hand, right? So those are the kind of relationships that you want to build, right?
So even before you are contemplating engaging a lawyer, we have events here, office hours with law firms that do help. We have lawyers show up for our events. Way is an intellectual property lawyer. He was here at the CMU Tech and Entrepreneurship event that Kevin held. Hi, Kevin. With us last week for McGinnis. So there's an opportunity to meet these people in a social setting and, sort of easy, get to know them a little bit before you're ready to engage, right? So really encourage you to find those opportunities. And probably the simplest, most repeatable way is office hours here at the Swartz Center with those lawyers, or going to the website, searching for a lawyer and reaching out for a 30-minute free consultation.
Yep.
I said I wasn't going to say lawyer jokes, but I heard a new one last week, and I saw the 1.3 million lawyers there. And so how do you know the difference between a catfish and a lawyer? One's a scum-sucking bottom feeder, the other's a fish.
All
That's a new
right.
one I last week.
All right. So
My son's a lawyer, okay? So I'm
Hey,
just all in
good
fun.
fun.
All in
We
good fun.
we do have all kidding aside, but again, over now going on 30 years for me and longer for Dave because he's a lot older than I am. We've spent a lot of time with a lot of folks and it makes a difference. When you have and it's not just lawyers, when you have the appropriate advisors around the table, right? It makes a difference. It's what sets you apart, right? Like there's amazing technology being created on this campus every day. All of you are highly motivated and brilliant and working on the next disruptive game-changing technology. I absolutely guarantee, I'm certain of that, right? But things don't fail because the technology sucks. Things fail because the team, the execution, because there's nuances in there, right? Because there's so many moving parts, right? So let's make sure that you have a high-performing team, that you've got all your ducks in a row in terms of squaring away all the documentation and making sure that people are contractually covered and that you're doing everything you can to maximize the opportunity of your technology so you can focus on building the business, right? So it's really important to do this right, okay? So, so this is an important concept, right? Because as I said earlier, right, like you can't frivolously call on your lawyer or anyone that bills for their time and ask a lot of them in a very sort of efficient, haphazard manner, because it will become prohibitively expensive very, very quickly. Okay. On the other hand, you can't avoid calling your advisors for help and assistance because you're worried about the expense. That defeats the purpose too. So we have to find a balance, right? We have to remember that these are folks that do bill for their time. These are folks that have a particular area of expertise that they are around you exclusively to help you be successful, right? So making sure that you're intentional about what you ask them for, right? And how you frame it, right? And understanding your goals, right? And being very clear and concise about what your needs are and what your expectations are, right? Set those guide rails. It's critically important because there are things that you absolutely need to use your counsel for, right? And there are things that perhaps can wait or that are not appropriate or that you could think about bundling in a more efficient manner. And we can sort of talk about different ways. But the most important concept to take away here is this idea that you don't want to spin out and iterate back and forth on trivial issues, right? You want to focus on the big picture items. You want to make sure that, again, that you're protected, that the business is able to move forward in an appropriate way, right? And you need to be comfortable that you can call your counsel. We're going to talk next about cost. We'll talk a little more about that. But so that is sort of the general concept, right? You always need to keep in mind who that person is, why you're talking to them, how they're going to help you, right? The more organized you are, the more detailed and discreet, right, that you can be in these conversations and the communications that you have, the better result it will be for everyone and the more able you'll be able to manage your costs.
And it took me years to learn this, but it's a technique that I used once I understood how this game was played. Is first of all, I would try to find base documents for anything that I wanted to accomplish through my network, right, on the internet at these sites that we mentioned. And then when I engaged with my lawyer, I said, here's our goal. Here's what we want to accomplish. What's the budget for this goal? And then they have to tell you what the budget is. And I'd set it up with them and said, you're going to communicate to me, where you are in the budget as we go through this process. And then I would follow up with an email stating explicitly the goal and what the budget was, so that there was no miscommunication on billing, because they're busy people. They're juggling multiple clients and they have billing systems that they're putting in, and they're not necessarily especially when they're handing this work to junior people in their firm to complete. They haven't been a part of that discussion of what the goal and what the budget was, and they're just billing their time is what they're supposed to do. And so if you set up this expectation that there's a specific goal, there's a specific budget, and you're going to communicate about that later, when the bill comes back twice as much, you have a point of negotiation and say, no, we agreed to $100, not $200, right? And so it's really, really important for you to set that sort of management process in place from the get-go, or you're going to see what some of the horror stories were, where that people just said, here, let's go do this. And they went their separate ways, and they came back with wildly mismatched expectations of what it was going to cost.
Yeah, absolutely. But keep in mind, that's on you as well.
It
right?
is
If you
absolutely.
set a budget to do something, and then you start to change your mind, or you start to spin out with lots of emails or communications, right? Then that's, again, all they have to, their commodity is their time, right? So understanding, you know, from the perspective that Dave said, which is exactly right, like set those expectations, set those boundaries, right? But it's on you as the client, right, to make sure that your practices match the scope of the engagement, right? It's you want to focus on the things that matter, right? And not spin out on little things, right? And so be careful about version control, be careful about the interaction, the back and forth. Like if you have a goal, right? The objective is to hit that goal. The objective is not to nuance it, right?
Right. I own that process, right? So if I did come back with some change that I wanted with, I would ask the question, okay, we're making this change. Where are we on budget? Right? So it's really your responsibility to manage that situation. You can't expect them to do that for you.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. So cost, right? Big issue. So, I mean, it is a cost, okay? But it can provide ROI. And I can use my last company as an example, okay? So it was a medical robotics company, rated here, the Robotics Institute, licensed technology out, started a business. Then over the course of 13 years, built something that someone actually cared about. And we were able to sell it for 275 million, 13 years after we started it, which represented a 27.5 times multiple of top line revenue from the prior year. So we had a $10 million business that we sold for 275. There's no way you can make that math work, right? So how did we get to that multiple? How did we get to that exit? It was all about the intangible value and future potential of the business that we built. We had 43 issued patents protecting our core technology, as well as providing us with opportunities to expand and extend the capability in a proprietary way. We had all of our documentation in place. We had all of our intellectual property captured. We had proprietary relationships based on marketing agreements and other types of strategies that we engaged and employed with hospitals of medical technology, hospital systems and distributors around the world that gave us some exclusivity around how we would distribute and utilize this technology around the world, right? So we were able to tell a story around the potential impact that our business could have in the future, which translated to value today, which allowed us to sell the business. And all of that happened because we had a vision, and then we had folks that could help us put that vision on paper, right? So when people started the due diligence on us, right, like it was very clear what was going on, where we were and where we were going, right? And so, yes, it was a cost, millions upon millions of dollars we spent on legal, right? But it absolutely provided us with an ROI. So we need to think about that within the context of where you are and where you all want to go. And we could talk about some of these different specific strategies, but I don't know if you have any sort of general concept around this, Dave.
Well, then just I understand that there's a wide range, right? So the commodity that they have to sell is their time, and at various law firms at various locations with various expertise are going to be wildly different. And so if you're engaging a New York law firm, or you're engaging a Washington, D.C. lobbying law firm, or a Silicon Valley law firm, their hourly rates are between $1,000 and $2,000 per hour for the partner level. Really,
Anyone want to go to law school now? Anyone change their mind?
got one over here.
Yeah.
Michigan law.
Yeah.
One of the firms that we work with here in Pittsburgh is smaller, but really good. And they charge a blended rate, meaning that you get partner time, you get associate time, and they charge $300 per hour. So that's 1/4 the cost. Now you have to decide, is the expertise or the connections and network of the Silicon Valley, New York, or Washington, DC law firm appropriate for that kind of a difference? Or am I doing just normal blocking and tackling in my business where it's much more efficient and cost effective to do it at the $300 rate, right? So that's the kind of trade-off decisions that you have to make as the founder, right, and the leader of your company. But it's not wrong in some cases to engage those $1,000 to $2,000 per hour lawyers. They may have a relationship, and I'll tell you a real example of this. So I'm on the board of a company called 4Moms. They apply low-cost robotics and electronics to baby products, and we had a product recall. And we went to a Washington, DC law firm where the lawyer was the chief operating officer of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, right? And so he knew everybody in the Consumer Product Safety Commission. He knew how it worked. He was $1,600 an hour, but he was worth every penny of it. Because if we would have engaged a $300 an hour lawyer, they didn't have any of those expertise or relationships, right? So these are the calculus that you have to go through in your head when you're making those decisions, and they're hard decisions. So, you know, when you're just getting started, that's what your advisors and your investors are for, to help you make those decisions, right? So you know, every decision you make to engage with the lawyer, you need to think about it up front, and you should engage with people who've done it before to help you make those decisions. Now, I don't want you to grind to a halt by seeking advice. It's paralysis by analysis, right? That's the challenge there. But there's a trade-off in making those decisions.
Yeah, so remember I talked about how smart we were in terms of building up our intellectual property portfolio and sort of building value around our business. And you know, the flip side of that is you can get sued, and we got sued. We were a little, 150 employee, rinky-dink little company here in Pittsburgh, one of the largest medical device companies in the world, sued us for patent infringement. And it was devastating, right? So what do we do? Same thing. We went around and we found a law firm that had actually successfully defended other companies of our size against this exact giant medical device company. And we had to employ 2 senior partners of this large law firm, this very well-known litigation firm. One of the partners was in New York City, one of the partners was in Los Angeles, and it was a package deal. So anytime we got on the phone, or anytime we did anything with them, both the partners had to be there, right? No matter how hard we thought that maybe just one could be there, because they were both $1,200 an hour. So every time we had a call, every time we did something, it was $2,400, right? And they insisted on being, and it was like, what were we supposed to do, right? And we spent $5 million, like lickety split. But we successfully defended ourselves, right? Kept the business going. So that was an example, right? Like there were plenty of really smart, capable folks in a variety of places that could have helped us, but we found people that actually had courtroom experience against this exact firm in a very similar situation. So, but at the end of the day, again, like for purposes of what we're trying to do here, okay, as you intentionally follow the steps that we talked about, right? Think about your needs, recognize that you're not special, that a lot of the things that you're going to need out of the gate, thousands, if not millions of companies before you have gone through similar exercises, right? Use your network to uncover firms and attorneys that have experience working with companies and people like you, right? Spend time talking with them, seeing if they're a good fit from a skill set and capability perspective. If you think they're a good fit from a personality perspective, because again, you're going to spend an awful lot of time with these folks. And then have the conversation about rates and fees and costs, right? And make sure that you're comfortable with what their models are. And then be very intentional and diligent and stay on top of the engagements. So you understand the budgeting, you understand where you are in the process, you take ownership and responsibility for it. So you get what you need within the boundaries of the budget that makes you comfortable, so you have line of sight to an ROI. Because that's why you're using them, right? And that's the process. That last bullet, communication, is critically important.
Yeah.
right? There should be no surprises on either end. So you should you should make sure that you're communicating on projects, on work, on timelines, on expectations, right? And listen, the good counsel, good advisors, right? They'll want to help you. They'll want to introduce you to customers and to potential investors and be problem solvers for you. If that's what you're looking for, right?
Really important here. You think you're busy as a CMU student right now? You're going to be much busier as a co-founder of a company. Just the way it is. So you really have to prioritize that communication. And most of you at the beginning, when you start, will not. I didn't at the beginning. I was like going a million miles an hour. And then, I got slapped in the face with some bills that I didn't expect. And I had to adjust my behavior. So one of the reasons Craig and I wanted to do this was to, help you get started the right way and sort of manage this process, manage it closely, and communications is key.
Yep, we just want you to start to think about these things. And Dave said this, right? You have to evaluate, right? Different firms have different expertise, right? You need to make sure that you're getting the right kind of expertise at the right place, at the right time, for the right cost. Right? But no one starts a business with the goal of hiring a lawyer, right? You all start a business with the goal of commercializing technology, building solutions, solving problems in the world, making a ton of money, whatever your goals are, right? But this is an important part of it. So you need to continually evaluate and make sure that you have appropriate partners at the table that have your best interests at heart and that are helping you. Okay. So we have a couple of stories. But any questions, any thoughts, reactions from the folks in attendance or the folks online?
So question, like before you get formal funding as a business, are there common scenarios where you will need to have a lawyer, where you will need to pay them? Like, because I'm wondering just about how you reconcile and you need to raise, some amount of funding to like cover the lawyer expenses, or at what point does that become an issue?
Well, so there's multiple different ways to answer that question. So the first one is some firms will have startup packages where they may not charge you any fees for a small period of time up front until you get to a fundraising event, and then you can pay them for some of those services so some might be free, some might be deferred, right? So deferred. So that's what you have to evaluate in the interviewing process. Now, if we think back to the fundraising ladder, and I'll oversimplify this, right? At the beginning, it's your sweat equity. Most of you are in that position right now. The investment into the business is your time and effort, and maybe some ancillary expenses that you're paying out of your own pockets, right? What we try to do here at the Swartz Center is make available to you early funding, the McGinnis Venture Competition, the Venture Bridge. When you graduate, we want to be one of the earliest checks that's being written into. But we also have partnership with other organizations like Innovation Works. Innovation Works has their Alpha Lab accelerators for software, Alpha Lab gear for hardware, Alpha Lab Health for healthcare and medical oriented companies. And now in conjunction with gear, they have the robotics factory, right? So getting into those relationships as quickly as possible provides some of the cash that you're going to need to pay lawyers as part of what you're doing. Alpha Lab actually pioneered a startup package with Denton's called Alpha Law. I don't know if they still have that.
They have packages.
Yeah, they have different. So there's different ways to do that, but the most common one at the stage most of you are at right now is either some free services and some deferred services, right? But if you're serious about what you're doing and you can't generate customer revenue quickly, which is the best way to finance your company ever, always, right? Have your customers pay you for your product. If you need time to get to that point, then you should be thinking about, where do I get my first $25,000, $50,000? So at that accelerator level, which Y Combinator is one of them, and they give you a lot more money than 25 or 50 or 100K these days, which is great. There's also the friends and family round, right? So if you have anybody in your friends and family network that are net worth individuals and believe in you, they can give you checks, 25, 50, 100K, right? That sort of thing that helps you get the money you need to go after what you're trying to accomplish. Does that make sense? Do you have anything to?
Yeah, no, I think it's spot on, right? So you should have an opportunity out of the gate to negotiate some fee deferrals, some discounts, right? to make sure that you can get going, right? Because again, they don't want to take all of your early capital to cover your startup expenses, because then what, right? Then you're sort of dead in the water. So again, the right kind of firm should have at least the flexibility, right? To give you the help you need, to defer things a little bit, and make sure that you can get going.
So it's not in the McGinnis competition, but in our undergraduate venture competition, the CMU Venture Challenge, a law firm puts up a in-kind prize of up to $5,000 worth of legal fees that for intellectual property. So if you go to other competitions outside of Carnegie Mellon, sometimes there are those in-kind prizes that can help you limit those expenses as well.
Any other questions? Okay. Do you want to tell a
Yeah,
story
so,
or two?
yeah, so this is a true story, and I'm gonna delete the names to protect the innocent. But we have it's a very successful Carnegie Mellon startup now. They're really breaking out. They've been in the news. They'll be in the news. But they did a Series A financing with a West Coast law firm as their counsel, and they just trusted that West Coast counsel to have their back. And if you're doing a Series A financing, the cost of that, and it's a range, but it should not exceed $30,000. That should be the upper end of what the financing costs. And it turns out that the venture capitalists, when they put the money in, they want you to use that money that they put in to pay the fees. The venture capital firm is not going to pay any fees to any lawyers. So you have to pay their lawyers and you have to pay your lawyers. Okay, and the venture capitalist expects you to pay it out of the money that they're putting in, so it's not coming out of their pocket. So, not knowing this, the founders trusted their lawyer, and they went through it, and the financing got done, and they got a bill for $125,000 because the lawyer was using other experts within the firm, and they didn't set a budget. They didn't say it will not exceed this amount, and lawyers like to talk to each other, so they would call back and forth between the different lawyers, and they charged all of those phone calls, and boom, they got a bill for $125,000. And then the lawyer that was the lead lawyer left and went to another firm. And they had nobody to talk to. Like, what do you do? Like, and they had no relationship with anybody else at the firm. And the firm has a collections office that was calling them and saying, pay us this money or we're going to repossess everything that you own, right? Ultimately, they got it negotiated down to $75,000, which was over 3 times more than it should have cost, right? The law firm said, well, we're saving you $50,000, right? And, so that should have never happened if you were communicating and setting budgets and setting boundaries up front. And again, the network that you have can help you understand what those boundaries are. And I said it should not exceed $30,000. That's not my starting point for that budget. My starting point for that budget from talking to my lawyers is $15,000, knowing that he or she's going to come back and say, no, this is what it usually costs for us. But if you left it unsaid, like it was in that situation, it spirals out of control. It's real money. Now, the $75,000 they paid could have hired an employee to help the company make progress. So there was a real opportunity cost as well in that mistake that was made. It's a real true story. I'm leaving the names out to protect the innocent in it.
So I'll give you one real quickly. I will also leave the names out to protect the innocent, but it was me. I had a friend of a friend who was a mergers and acquisitions attorney, so he was expert in doing deals, selling companies. This was in the early days of Blue Belt, which is my company. And we had a new idea that we thought was patentable. And so I talked to a friend of a friend who was a mergers and acquisitions attorney who said, absolutely, I can do that for you. Oh, okay. And so, I mean, you were still an intern, you weren't even around. Yeah, but this was even before your time, right? This was so off he went, and he worked in a pretty significantly sized firm. So I'm sure he was farming it out to the IP people and trying to manage it, but he had no idea what he was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. Clearly, the IP attorney had no idea what he or she was doing, and so we went back and forth. It took an extraordinarily long time, almost 9 months, to get this thing put together. We didn't do some of the basic things I know now you need to do, like prior art searches, competitive landscape analysis. We didn't do any of that stuff. We just wrote this patent and in it went. And of course it was denied. There was tons of prior, and there was no novelty there, and it was an absolute waste. And I didn't set the budget, didn't do anything, and got a bill for $60,000 for a failed attempt at protecting something that had potential for novelty and could have affected our business. And ultimately never went anywhere other than the fact that it cost this person, who will remain nameless, that was me, $60,000. And this is 20 plus years ago. So translate that into today's dollars. It was a very expensive lesson. So needless to say, I have not made that mistake again. And the point of these stories is, and the reason that we're here, the only reason we're here is so none of you make those mistakes, right? None of you should go now and just willy-nilly grab someone to help you incorporate without understanding their expertise, and that they ask you the questions, they understand your needs and priorities. None of you will, right, just commission someone to do work for you without understanding the expertise that they bring to the table, the impact, the budget parameters, the goals, the objectives, the deliverables, right? None of you will allow your counsel, or any advisor for that matter, to go radio silent on you, right? I mean, these are the principles that you have to understand. And again, translate it into so many other disciplines, right? The outsourced development, for your accounting and tax planning, for anything that you use around your business to help you grow, okay? So sometimes it's painful to relive some of our mistakes, but it's all in for the objective of education. So looks like we're up on time. We've got another minute or two. Anything else that y'all want to kick around? I hope you don't think less of me now that you know that story, but I wouldn't do that. I was young and impressionable, and that M&A lawyer was a good salesperson. Any other questions or thoughts? So the takeaway is,
I have a question.
yeah.
So for if I'm going to have a like subscription model and price package, is those kind of things I have to also involve a lawyer?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
I didn't understand.
Yeah, so it's more like you're in the process of for deciding the product price. Is those kind of things you also want to consult with a lawyer?
No, you don't need to consult
No,
with a
okay.
lawyer on your product price. That is a
Okay,
sales and marketing decision that you, as founders of your company, make yourself.
Right. Once you
Okay,
decide on
got
the
it.
price, then the lawyer can help make sure that it's appropriately documented in your sales agreements. But
oh, okay, I
that-
see.
I wouldn't use counsel for those sorts of sort of business decisions around the core operations of the business, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
And as Dave said a couple of times, go to the mentor page, look up all the different folks that have agreed to volunteer their time to meet with you, start to talk to folks, query them on their expertise and experience, see if you like them. You can see yourself working with them.
And that is true for any service provider outside of law. It can be accounting, it can be marketing consulting, it can be design consulting. We have over 1,000 mentors, experts, coaches, judges that want to help CMU startups, literally at your fingertips. And so your EIRs can help you identify the really good ones, but you can self-serve by going to the mentor page or the expert page on the Swartz Center website.
All right. Thanks for spending some time with us. Hope you got something out of it. And we're around if you want to talk some more. Thank you.